four of the most infamous cold cases of the civil rights movement, and one man who couldn't leave them alone. Jerry Mitchell is a Pulitzer Prize finalist and MacArthur Genius recipient, and is one of the most celebrated investigative journalists today. He's been called the South's Simon Wiesenthal. His new book, Race Against Time, is a must-read. Today on The Uncomfortable Truth, we're going to talk with Jerry and explore the importance of taking a stand for what is right. This is Loki Mulholland, and it's time to get uncomfortable. In 2011, I was with my mother, freedom rider and civil rights activist Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, in Jackson, Mississippi. Like most summer days in Mississippi, it was hot and muggy. We were standing in a pavilion. It was the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Rides, and as we were waiting for the next event to begin, my then 69-year-old mother suddenly got very excited. You would have thought she was seeing Elvis. She leans over and says, "That's Jerry Mitchell." To be honest, I didn't know who he was. She gave me a quick rundown. I walked over and asked Jerry if he would be willing to do an interview for a film about my mother. He said, "For Joan? Anything." I went back and told her that Jerry would do an interview for the documentary. A little confused, she said, "But you haven't even made the movie yet." I replied, "No, he's actually going to be in the movie." "Well, how did you get him to do that?" "Well, it was easy. I just told him it was about you." You see, to many people, my mom is a hero. But to my mother, Jerry Mitchell is hers. Well, welcome, Jerry.
Hey, Loki. Good to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to live that one down now.
Yeah, yeah.
I do a lot of assemblies. I speak to a lot of kids, and I actually show this clip of you from An Ordinary Hero, which is the first film. You did an interview with me, and when I show them this, before I show it, I explain to kids that you are my mom's hero, that you use your words, reading, investigating, to bring these people to justice. For a quick rundown, can you explain, walk through what those four main cases are?
Sure, absolutely. The four main cases I worked on that ended up being convictions in were the Medgar Evers case. Medgar Evers was assassinated in Jackson, Mississippi in 1963, shot in just outside his own house, his own driveway.
Mm-hmm.
On the same night that President Kennedy delivered the nation's first civil rights speech. And so he was killed. His assassin had a couple of trials in 64, but essentially walked away from it. And then the case got reopened in 89, and he got indicted at the end of 1990, and he was finally convicted and sentenced to life in prison in 1994. The next case I worked on involved a guy by the name of Vernon Damer. A lot of people haven't heard of Vernon Damer, don't know who he is, but he was a farmer, businessman, essentially died defending his family from a Klan attack in 1966. And so the guy who ordered it was Sam Bowers, who's the head of the White Knights of the KKK in Mississippi, responsible for at least 10 killings in Mississippi that we know of. And so that case got reopened in 1991, after the Damer family met me and then met with the district attorney. And so it got reopened, but the DA pretty much got cold feet over time. And then he went out of office. Another guy came in who seemed to care even less about the case. It looked like nothing was going to happen. Then this guy who used to work for Sam Bowers came forward, and then Billy Roy Pitts, and all these things that kind of had to happen happened. And Sam Bowers was convicted in 1998 of the ordering the murder of Vernon Damer, and sentenced to life in prison. I also worked on a case that probably a lot of people have heard of, which is the Birmingham church bombing in 1963 by the Klan that killed, those four beautiful girls.
Mm.
And, one guy had been convicted back in 1977, but the other two living suspects obviously had never been tried. And I went and interviewed one of the guys. Actually, his wife asked me to come talk to him. And so he insisted he was watching wrestling, by the way. And
Right.
it turned out there wasn't any wrestling on TV, for him to be watching. So his alibi got exposed. He got arrested, and then he got convicted of 4 counts of murder, one for each one of those girls, and sentenced to 4 life sentences, obviously. So, and then that was in 2002, and then in I began working on the what so-called Mississippi Burning case way back in 1989. It's actually the first case I started dealing with, but it just didn't go anywhere. And then, lo and behold, I kind of got another way into the case through this interview that was sealed by Sam Bowers, whom I mentioned earlier, who said the main
Hmm.
instigator of the entire affair walked out of the courtroom a free man in the federal trial in 1967. And the guy I was referring to was a guy by the name of Edgar Ray Killen, or as he's known locally, Preacher Killen. So I called him up and, took him and his wife out for catfish, talked to him quite a bit. He insisted he didn't have anything to do with it, but then proceeded to basically make his racism plainly known. He told me things like he wished he could have shaken hands with James Earl Ray, and killed King or convicted of killing King,
Hmm.
and anyway, long story short, he was convicted of that, and on the exact anniversary, Loki, the exact anniversary of the killings, 41st anniversary, June 21st in 2005. So those are he was he
Wow.
was sentenced to 60 years, and he actually died in prison in 2018. So, yeah. But I interviewed all those guys except for Bowers. I did talk to Bowers briefly one time on the telephone. That was all he would talk to me.
And what's interesting is there's another connection to that because and for the Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, the Mississippi burning case, is that um, it was learned later on that uh, before they killed those 3 civil rights workers, they actually tried to kill my mother and Ed King and a
Yep.
few others just a couple of weeks before to stop Freedom Summer. And because they didn't kill her, they killed her friends instead.
Right.
Um, and so I know from my mom with the Medgar Evers case in particular, and obviously with Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. I mean, the work you did was to help bring these convictions for the people who killed her friends.
Yeah. It's,
Um,
it's an honor to do so. And I felt, I feel honored to know your mom and to know all these families. I know you know a
yeah,
lot of them too. The Evers family and the Damer family, just a wonderful family, and then the families of the 4 girls, and just talked to Lisa McNair this morning, who's the sister of
mm,
Denise McNair that was killed,
right,
and then talked to all 3 families actually for this story I've got coming out because, um, I mean, and it's an obvious thing. I was curious about what they thought about what's been happening lately, with George Floyd and Arbery in Georgia and all these other things that we see kind of unfolding in the nation now, just kind of erupting,
right.
just roiling, and so
And it's important you bring that up because all of these cases were this is Black Lives Matter 1960s.
that's a good way to put it, and because they didn't matter in the '60s. I mean, and they didn't. A black life did not count for much in Mississippi. If
Right,
you were white and you killed a black man or black woman, um, or black child, I mean, you essentially got away
right.
with it for many, many, many years.
Yes, and one of those children, you and I are actually working on a documentary together. Full disclosure, everyone. Emmett Till, right? And these civil rights activists are known as the Emmett Till generation. Meg Revers worked on that case even.
Yeah, well, that's what you hear from these young African Americans who were, somewhere around, teenagers or about to become teenagers or
Right,
and for so many of them, because you didn't necessarily have footage of everything out there then, it was the
right,
photo. It's the photo that ran in Jet magazine, and that was kind of everybody's exposure to what happened to Emmett Till. So it's kind of like such a seminal
hmm
moment. It was kinda like before they saw the picture, and then it was after they saw the
right,
picture, and after people saw those picture and I've even heard white civil rights activists who have talked about
hmm
that picture, about what a seminal moment it played in their lives. Because it's kinda like from that moment forward, they made a
right.
decision. "I wanna do something about this," and also meant putting their own lives on the line. So, it's
Yeah,
really fascinating.
and the film hasn't been released yet, at least as of this recording. A documentary called The Evers, of which you were interviewed for that film as well. This is about Medgar Evers and his family. Towards the end of the film, Mrs. Evers says, "I asked her this question. I said, 'Who killed Medgar Evers?'
Mhm,
And she says, 'Well, there's a man who pulled the trigger,
mhm,
but I have to ask, was it society that killed him?'"
mhm, sure.
And every time we see this, it is society
Mhm.
that has killed a George Floyd, a Trayvon, an Emmett, a Medgar. Time and time again, we see that collectively, as white America, um, you know, we have contributed to the killing of these black men, black children, black women.
We don't what I feel like, I think, the Bob Dylan song,
Mm,
it hasn't changed, has it? He wrote a song about Megger called "Only a Pawn in the Game" in their game,
right,
but the killer of Meg Revers, the assassin, was really only a pawn in the game of these white politicians.
right,
Um, so you still see that. I still see people who, I mean, let's take the guy that drove to El Paso, the Texas guy that drove all the way to El Paso and suddenly is carrying out a massacre. Well, he said
right,
he was trying to prevent an invasion, right? Well, the
right,
politicians had stoked everybody up on that, and
right,
that was exactly what happened in Mississippi in 1964. Your mom and Ed King and others,
right.
were on the firing line.
Right. And you go back to 55 with Emmett Till. I mean, this is, right on the heels of Brown versus Board. They're stoking this fire of this, miscegenation, and if you integrate the schools and all this sort of rhetoric that is feeding into this. Black Monday, I think, was
Was the
Judge.
name, yeah, the name that they gave the case in
Right,
Mississippi in 1954, and it became the title of a very famous speech, which was
right. From a judge, a
oh yeah,
Mississippi judge.
who later served on the Mississippi Supreme Court. This is a guy who I think went to Harvard or either Yale. I can't remember which one it was, Harvard or Yale, some
Right,
big school. And yeah, and he delivered this horrible racist speech. And so you think none of this. And by the way, that speech got printed and got distributed to every child in Mississippi. I mean, can you imagine the impact of that?
right.
And guess who heard him deliver that speech? Byron D. Beckwith.
Mm,
And and because I know from his son what effect that had on him. And Beckwith himself talked to me a little bit about that, but I mean, he wasn't the same after that. I mean, he
right.
essentially from that point forward, he was all about preserving segregation, but mainly destroying integration. He
Yeah.
showed up at his church armed to the teeth so that he could prevent anyone African American from possibly, considering going in the door. And at the
Right.
Episcopal church where he attended, in Greenwood, Mississippi, and different things like that. And set up a card table. That wild. Set up a card table near the governor's office. They're on Capitol Street in Jackson, and was selling Black Mondays or sometimes giving them away. You know, incredible.
My work has taken me to a lot of places, and I've been fortunate to meet some incredible people. But when I came to Selma and met Joanne Blackman Bland, I knew I was in the presence of greatness. Joanne was 11 years old when she was attacked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday in 1965. She wasn't old enough to vote, but understood its importance enough to be there. After Selma is an in-depth look at how our right to vote has eroded since the signing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The fight for the right to vote continues. Get informed. You can find After Selma on Amazon Prime or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection. I know from my mother, when she was about 10 years old, she goes down to Georgia and she sees separate but equal. This comparison, she sees the brand new white school and she sees the black shack, one room school shack, and she has this pivotal moment in her life, this turning point where she says, "This is wrong, and I'm going to do something about it." And she, I think we can say, she paid a price for it. Fortunately, it wasn't at the ultimate price, but she did suffer. There's consequences to doing what's right, even if it's not easy. What moment was it for you that you decided that you were going to go down this road and start investigating these cases?
I think the story hooked me to start with. I saw the movie Mississippi Burning, which is about the fictional movie, but it's about the real life killings of James Chaney, Andy Goodman, Mickey Schmurda, the three civil rights workers that were killed by the Klan in 1964 Mississippi. It was the first day of Freedom Summer,
Right.
And so that obviously. It was a very powerful film from a standpoint of this. I knew nothing about any of this. And so by the end of the film, despite its many faults,
right,
it doesn't portray activists well at all. It makes the FBI the heroes. We could go through a long list of problems.
Right. Yeah.
But I happened to see the film with two FBI agents who investigated the case. A journalist who covered the case, Bill Miner, your mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so that began my journey. I didn't know anything about the case. They started telling me about the case. I didn't really know much at all about the violence in the civil rights movement. And the other part of it is I couldn't wrap my head around there were more than 20 guys involved in murdering these three young men. And nobody had ever been prosecuted for murder. And that's what I couldn't wrap my head around. More than 20 Klansmen involved in a triple murder, and they all walk away. Nobody gets prosecuted for murder. I'm like, how did that happen? And they tried to explain it to me. It was like, no, there wasn't really an explanation. And,
right. There isn't one.
There isn't one, exactly.
Except for the obvious, of course.
And so that kind of jump-started my interest. And I'm like, well, I didn't know that happened. And then all of a sudden, I'm about Medgar Rivers. It's like, well, I didn't know anything about that. I knew the name on the sign, right, on the street sign, but I really didn't know anything about him either. And so it began that journey to anyway.
But you just couldn't leave it alone.
I couldn't. I mean, how do you leave it alone? It's
well, I mean, obviously, there's been plenty of people who could. Well, so what is it about you?
I think, I don't know it's me at all. I happen to be at the right time, in the right place, under the right circumstances. I am a person of faith, so I do believe, in a divine hand, involved in this as well, that loves justice. And so it's much greater than me, this cause for justice, which you saw so many people killed for.
Right.
I think the thing that was so awful about these cases, it's not just these guys got away with murder, it's the fact that everybody knew they got away with murder. And that's stuck in my craw. And that's why I kept going. It was really anger that, kind of, you know, indignation or whatever you want to call
Hmm.
it, just kind of fueled me. I'm like, what? 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 So like, I mean, every little step of the way that I was finding out more information, I was shocked. And
Yeah.
I was a kid during I'm 61 now, but I was, what was I, 4 years old when Medgar Evers was killed? And my dad was in the Navy and we were living in San Diego. So, I mean, I
Mm.
didn't know anything about any of this. I wasn't even around. And then I grew up in East Texas, which was very much the South, but
Right.
none of what we're talking about here, at least I know some of it's racial past now, but I didn't know any of it growing up.
Right.
And so I didn't learn that till later, really.
And there were people who, um, you said, you should just leave this alone. These are
Hmm.
old men.
Hmm. Oh, I had plenty of people tell me that. And they call me up and say, "Why are you writing about a dead N word?" All that kind of.
But I mean, you have this response. It's something you said once, and I don't want to butcher it, but these are old men. Just let them be. It was basically that these were like young men who got away with it.
And tell me to leave them alone.
Right.
These old men, and what I would say to them, I'd say, look, these were young killers. They just happen to get old, and
Right.
that's was my response and has been my response to people because they see that these guys going off to you know trial or going off to prison, and they just think they look like grandfathers and they feel sorry for them. And I'm like,
Right.
I don't understand who these guys are.
Yeah. These are cold-blooded killers.
Yeah, and I mean, you wouldn't. I mean, like someone who carried out a triple murder. Do you think they ought to walk the streets?
Right. I mean, or bombs a church.
Oh, I mean, incredible. Firebombed not just Vernon Dahmer, his whole family was in the house.
Right.
Set it on fire. He returned fire so his family could escape safely out a back window, and the flames burned his lungs essentially.
Yeah.
He died later that day, and here he was. I mean, this is like the stuff that gets me. He had fought his whole life for the right of all Americans to be able to vote. Just so
Hmm.
African Americans could vote in Mississippi. I mean, that's how
Right.
basic that is. And 3 weeks after he was killed, in the mail came his voter registration card.
Wow.
I mean, I mean that still gets to me.
Yeah.
It's just, and if you know the family as well, they're such an incredible family and
They
just
are.
the earth, incredible people. I know you've met them, and anyway, it's just it's incredible.
So again, coming back to this idea of doing what's right, even though it's not easy.
Not popular, not easy. Maybe nobody else wants to do it, and
Right.
I mean that's really, why do you do it? And it's an injustice.
Right. But I mean, but you're taking some risk here.
Yeah, I mean, I had some people didn't like it.
Some of them wore robes. I take it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They like to call me apparently and
Yeah.
write me and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. I've got a couple of those recordings. Yeah.
yeah. They're kind of they're well, if nothing else, they're entertaining, I guess now. So
Well, I remember when we were first shooting An Ordinary Hero. I wanted to get an establishing shot outside your house, and you're like, "Yeah, I can't have you do that right now.
yeah.
You'd rather people not know where you lived." At least in 2011. Yeah, so I want to talk about one of the threats.
Sure.
There's a lot of humor in the time. I mean, you have to find it, but
You do.
I know you've told the story a million times. But
All right.
visiting De La Beckwith.
God, it's chilling and now funny. You know what I mean? It was chilling at the time, but there were funny aspects to it. Yeah, or in retrospect, humorous aspects to it. You have the
Right.
absolutely most racist person I ever spent serious time with, and we spent about 6 hours talking. And
Mm.
inward this, inward that, and of course, every other race that isn't white. He was disparaging or claim us cursed by God, and he's part of Christian identity. And so
Right.
they're very anti-Semitic and believe Jews are the spawn of Satan and all this ridiculous garbage. And so I had 6 hours of that. Of course, I'm feeling like I need to go get a bath or something, you know. And so it was getting dark, and he insisted on like walking me out to my car, and I'm like, that's okay, I think I can find my way. Just parked at the end of the driveway. And so he insisted on walking me a car anyway. So he gets me out there, kind of blocks my way. He says, "You write
Mm.
positive things about white Caucasian Christians, God will bless you. If you write negative things about white Caucasian Christians, God will punish you. If God does not punish you directly, several individuals will do it for him." And so
Mm.
his wife had made me a sandwich. I
Yeah.
think you can guess what I did with the sandwich.
Well, I think they offered you a drink too, right?
Oh yeah, that's the incredible part. So at some point, his wife brings Byron Diedelbeck with she was, by the way, just as racist as he was,
Oh yeah.
and so brings him a drink. And when I first saw it, it looked like orange soda, right?
Right.
But then I started looking at it a little more closely, and it's like bubbling furiously, like some kind of like mad scientist, not normal soda fizz. I'm talking about like a mad scientist potion. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
furiously bubbling. And of course, I'm curious now. I'm like going, what is that? And he said, "Why, that's." He explained it. It was indeed orange soda,
Mm.
but it was combined with food grade hydrogen peroxide. I'm not making this up. And
Wait, is that the cure-all?
he thought that he believed it was a part of a treatment which some people may have heard of that's called chelation. That's Chelation. And so for those that want to Google it or something, but anyway, they claim you can ingest something which will then grab all the poisons in your body and take them out. That's the
But but
idea.
but not the poison of racism though.
Apparently not that poison. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, he had a Klan funeral when he was buried, and I don't think this is actually in the book. I actually got invited to his funeral
Really?
by the son, and both my wife at the time and my boss were both like, "You are not going."
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not in the book. That's additional material.
all right, all right. Exclusive right here. All right, that's great. An Ordinary Hero was my first award-winning documentary. It's about the life of my mother, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, and her participation in the civil rights movement. For most of us, our mothers are heroes because they're mothers, and mom is just mom. But when your mother's a civil rights icon, and yet you never really knew it, things change. Go check out An Ordinary Hero and find out how choosing to do what was right instead of what was easy helped change the world. You can find it on Amazon Prime or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection. Yeah, so for those who want to, I mean, obviously, you, my mom, I mean, there's different ways that we go about doing this work.
Sure.
Um, and those who are thinking about it, obviously, they have this concern about what are the neighbors going to think,
Right.
and
Yeah, two of my neighbors, by the way, at one point were friends or knew the killers in the Mississippi burning case. So what are the odds of that?
wow.
First I found out one neighbor was, and then I found my other neighbor was. I'm like, what in the world is going on? What are the odds?
But I mean, it's. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to make a lot of friends doing this sometimes. I
No,
mean, but you will. You'll make new friends. I mean,
exactly. And
you're
that's what I found. And people in Mississippi have been totally generous about it. And people from outside Mississippi have been great about it. So
right.
and I have indeed made a lot of friends, all around the country.
Yeah. Well, and the Evers family in particular.
Oh, love Murley. I just talked to her the other night about George Floyd and
Yeah.
what happened, and like I said, some others as well, and so it's just awful, and she just feels like that America is going backwards, and
Yeah.
we're replaying what happened in the '60s. Definitely feels like '68 right now.
Yeah, I'm 68. I mean, I was talking with my mom this morning about that. And is this like 68 all over again?
It feels like,
She said the only difference is that I can't see the smoke coming out of DC
yeah.
yet.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it hasn't yet, but there are some places the smoke is coming up right now. So
Yeah. Um, there's this thing, justice delayed is justice denied.
sure, yeah, you hear that a lot. You hear that a lot.
Right. But was that the case with Medgar?
Well,
When you see the reaction of Mrs. Evers
oh, absolutely.
when the verdict comes through.
Oh, that's just incredible. And I was
Right.
there, and just cheers and just thank you, Mega. It's just for everything for you know everything for Mega, and just
Right.
I'm so glad I don't have to say alleged assassin anymore. She said,
Right.
and and she was just the joy of justice
Yeah.
taking finally taking place, and it's kind of became joyous and a relief in another hand as well. And so yeah, it was an incredible moment. In fact, let me back up a little bit and
Sure.
tell you a bit about that. Um, when that guilty verdict came down, Byron D. LeBeck was convicted of the murder of Medgar Evers.
Hmm.
You literally could hear the waves of joy as they cascaded down the hall.
Yeah.
Well, it reached a foyer full of people, black and white, just erupted in cheers. And, I just felt chills, Lucky, because the impossible had suddenly become possible.
Right.
And I guess that whole process really opened my eyes to the fact, hey, there could be other cases too, really.
Right.
I mean, this is really possible, and it was the first, conviction of these
Yeah.
cases. I've been 24 now total since that, 23 others since that first one.
Wow. And I just think of, regardless if even if the person has already died, in regards to the killers and so forth, um, getting the story right is so
Yes,
critical. I mean, this is what we're doing right now with the Emmett Till film
absolutely.
that we're working on. It's the narrative that we are sharing about Emmett Till is the fact that these other people got away with murder.
Exactly.
It wasn't just two people.
Exactly.
It was actually
We had
7 or 8.
the murder of Emmett Till, and you had the murder of truth. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like you had two murders that day, or in the weeks that followed, and months that followed, that happened in that case. And I think that's where you have to start,
Hmm.
because you can't get justice until you get truth, right?
Right.
And sometimes, let's say in Emmett Till case, or there's so many cases like it, more than 100
Right.
like it, 120 or so, that we're never had justice, never, and won't,
Hmm.
unless something arises that we don't know at this moment. Um, so you know, but you can still have truth, if that makes sense. I mean, maybe you
Yeah.
can't have justice like you would like to have in a criminal court or whatever, but
Right.
you have the truth, and if the truth is becomes known, then that can make a difference, even though you're not having a trial per
Right.
se, or whatever it is. And so it's very I just think the truth is just a very powerful thing. And back to kind of a question you asked earlier, and I didn't really answer it, is you were talking about, what about justice delayed, right?
Right.
Why? Just delayed is justice denied. But here's what I would say in response to that. What, why not ask the families? Why not ask the families this question?
Right.
Um, and sure, justice now is not going to be the same as justice would have been back when these guys were young guys. But if you're going to be honest, they probably would have got out in a few years, like they did in a lot of these cases, the
Yeah.
very handful of convictions that actually were back then. A lot of them just got slapped on the wrist and let right back out of prison. Um, and so, but for the families, this was important. It was not just having justice in a sense for their loved ones after all these years, but also Mississippi or the
Hmm.
United States or whoever it is saying we will not stand for this anymore. We are standing up against these kind of race killings that have gone unpunished strictly because of the color. The killings took place because of the color of the skin, and then the
Right.
killers got away with it because of the color of their skin. So, and so this helps for society to be able to say this isn't, this is wrong.
Well, and I think from this standpoint as well of the importance of the truth, there's a healing part of that as well.
Absolutely.
But thinking of these lynchings, obviously slavery. This is the American Holocaust.
What? How many? I'm trying to remember the exact number. Over 4,000.
Over 4,000. Yeah, that we know about.
Yeah, exactly. We just have recorded in some way.
Right. Now, when it came to the Holocaust, the importance of having the truth there,
Exactly.
because as we look to this day and age, 70 years later, there are people out there denying it.
Exactly. And that's a perfect example.
But to have the power of that truth there, and what that does for society in general, we can't do this again. Not that it hasn't happened again, because it has. But as a society, we're more aware of it, and we're willing to stand up against it. But with American exceptionalism, obviously, we look at ourselves differently, right? That we're not them. And so we struggle at addressing our own sins.
It's much easier for us to look at for lack of a better term, the sins of somebody else than to look at our own, atrocities and massacres and,
Yeah.
annihilations and lynchings and all those things. So, yeah, I think it's important. And I had one other story related to kind of just the topic we're talking about. Really
Hmm.
interesting to me how that people you would think they would get this right, but how they can be so blinded and not see. I think this is a decent example of that. I had somebody call me and we talked about people complaining. So this person was upset that I wrote about these killings of Cheney
Hmm.
and how dare I write this about Cecil Price, who was a deputy who was involved in the killings. He pulled him over, which led to the mob killing him and everything involved, and of course involved in the cover up.
Hmm.
How dare I write this about such a fine man, Cecil Price?
Right.
And as we continue to talk, she mentioned that her own daughter had been murdered.
Mm.
And she was saying, well, I've been willing to give it up. Why can't these families give it up? And so I just asked her, I said, no, what if? Because she told me I said, well, what happened with the case? And she said, well, the murderer, it was a trial. He got acquitted. Of course, I
Mm.
covered courts enough. I know what that means. Like, he got acquitted. You can't try him again for murder in
Right.
Constitution. That's it.
Yeah.
And so I said, now, what if that guy could be tried again for murder? Would you be for it? And she goes, I would want that. I'd want it right now. And I said, don't you think these families feel the same way?
Right.
And she couldn't see that, Loki. I don't understand. I was like, to me, it's like it's clear as day, but she couldn't see that. And I think one of the reasons was lack of empathy. and lack of knowing our history. There were people who actually testified in that trial that we were talking about right now, who claimed that the Ku Klux Klan was a really good organization. They were actually including a former mayor.
Hmm.
Can you believe that? And it's like
Well,
we don't know our history. That's one of our real problems. And so I hope, at least in some small way, my book can contribute to that. To so people can read it. And I've had a lot of people who've read it who said, "I never knew all this happened." And you would think they would know these things, but as you know and I know, a lot of times people don't know these things.
in my other life, I'm a filmmaker, and one of my more fascinating films I created is the award-winning film titled Black, White, and Us. It's about viewing racism through the lens of transracial adoptions in Utah. Utah? Yeah, Utah. It just so happens to be the transracial adoption capital of the world. So what happens when white families who didn't believe racism existed anymore adopts a black child? Find it on Amazon Prime or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection. I'm not saying that the police force is a whole bunch of Klansmen. I'm sure there are Klansmen still in the police force, just not to the extent of what it was like in Mississippi back in the '60s, but by understanding that history, and how that could actually happen,
Yes.
right, and see the collusion that was there and the cover-ups, knowing that, if we can see that and understand that, then if we have that history, then we can see how it relates to today, and then we can actively go, okay, why did that happen? Why were they able to infiltrate? And we use that history, and how do we can use that to train people today so we don't repeat the past?
And I know you do, and your mom, you and your mom both do, and go around and try to inform people and let them know these
Right.
stories, true stories. So it does impact the present. It can, over and over again. I know you probably have similar stories where people have heard these stories, and I just had one the other day email. It's like, I've decided I want to be a history teacher
Yeah.
and tell, teach this. I'm like, wow. And of course, had others that want to be journalists and investigative
Yeah.
reporters. And so, I feel very humbled by that.
Well, yeah. And so here you were doing this work. We all have our way of doing this to combat this racism. Can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, you speak to people all over the country. People always ask my mom, "What can I do? What can I do?" So what do you say? I mean, beyond just because we've already talked about that, the truth. What else? What else is there?
Living fearlessly. And
Mm-hmm.
living fearlessly is not about living without fear, it's about living beyond fear,
Mm.
about living for something greater than ourselves. And so you see that with your mom. You see that with the people who were involved with the movement.
Mm-hmm.
You see that, can see that today sometimes in various things. And I think the people who were involved in these cases, the families, the authorities, even the jurors, I mean, it took great courage to do what they did. Yeah.
Yeah. So where do we go from here?
Well, that's a great question. Where do we go from here? I think that I think we keep going down that road, and I think when injustices happen, we see if there's a way to remedy that. Can we bring justice to what have been injustices? If there
Mm-hmm.
are wrongs, can we bring remedy them or make amends or whatever that reconcile? Whatever the various possibilities are, the circumstances, and obviously seek to have justice. And but truth is just plays such a key role. So me as an investigative reporter, I see it in those ways that you expose the truth and over again, not just in these cases, but in other things. Not just me, but other people as well, and reporters and investigative reporters who worked on these various things. We just did a series about the horrible conditions in prisons in Mississippi and basically said, look, if Mississippi, if you don't do something about these prisons, they're going to blow up. And
Yeah,
they did.
and they did.
Did.
Yeah,
All these inmates died and all this violence. And the Justice Department now is investigating. And now Mississippi, of all things, has picked the new corrections commissioner is actually a reformer.
yeah. Now, um, I want to talk about something else that you've been doing, and it's the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting. That's something you created.
I did, along with some others,
Sure.
and we started in early 2019, and we've already begun to fulfill our mission, which is to bring change, where needed, and we're not going to change, but we're going to expose it so therefore it can come to light and people can do something about it.
Want a great way to help a worthy organization and educate children about the civil rights movement? Visit our foundation, the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation, at the JTMFoundation.org. That's the JTMFoundation.org. We are a 501c3 established to help end racism through education. A $5 monthly recurring donation will provide curriculum for 30 students. As my mother used to say, I can't do everything, but I can do something, because doing nothing is not an option. If you have wanted to help in this cause, but didn't know how, now you can. The Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation at the JTMFoundation.org. So, Jerry, do you have any advice for people who who want to go out there and make a difference, who see a wrong and want to make some change?
I think the key advice, and this kind of fits with the advice I generally give journalists, because but it applies to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
If someone said to me, "What is the most important characteristic for a journalist to have?" My answer would be persistence.
Mm-hmm.
Persistence. And that is my opinion why these cases got reopened and prosecuted. You are willing to push things, to write about things, to expose things, um, even when you get tired of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're purposely doing it, as I say sometimes, and this is strictly probably as a journalist, you sometimes have to embarrass people into doing the right thing, and
Right.
so true. You just like protesters did in the movement. I mean, you're kind of embarrassing the powers that be, right?
Right.
You're showing up their inanity, so to
Yeah.
speak, how inane they are, and therefore they don't like that.
Right.
They've either got to correct it or do something, about it.
I've known you for several years now, obviously since 2011, and like my mom, um, to many people you're a hero, and deservedly so. And I know you don't like to hear that because my mom doesn't like people when call her a hero and such. But it is what it is. I mean, the lives you have changed. That's what we're here for. That's what it's all about. Is changing lives to make this world better.
That's important. I mean, we want people to have better lives, to have justice when they've never gotten justice, to give them a voice when they've never gotten a voice, to be a voice for the voiceless, a voice for the oppressed, a voice for those who've been pushed down, a voice, from a faith perspective, a voice for the least of these,
Right.
those who have been trampled on and mistreated and abused and killed. And I think that a lot of people, the most important thing I think is to be able to see things from other people's perspective. It's so easy to be humble enough to do that. And I
Yeah.
think it's so easy for people to look down on somebody else or to think, oh, well, what can they contribute or whatever else. Instead of, I mean, George Floyd case is a perfect example.
Mm.
Uh, that the 911 call claimed he was drunk, and he was in his car, and he just kind of got treated as less than human,
Right.
don't think anybody would dispute that. I mean, a knee on the neck for I don't know how many minutes.
9 minutes. Yeah.
I think it's over 2 minutes, Loki, that there was someone consistently saying, check his pulse, check his pulse, check his pulse, check his pulse. They didn't check his pulse for over 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Literally. I mean, just nothing. That's not human. So we've got to have humanity to those even that we may disregard or society may disregard and show that humanity and compassion.
And if we think that way about other people who don't look like us,
Yes.
then we really need to check ourselves. And we need to move beyond our own discomforts and get uncomfortable.
I think it's a good way to put it. We've got to get uncomfortable where we're willing to spend time with those who are not like us.
Thank you again for listening. Make sure you head to my Patreon page at patreon.com/Loki Mulholland. Show a little love if you can, and get access to even more content. Until next time, don't be afraid to get uncomfortable.